All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review in our RBT Exam Practice Question Series, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout-out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. If you, a behavior technician, are asked to use a differential reinforcement of other behaviors intervention with your client, what are you primarily going to be looking for relative to the behavior? All right, first, what is the question asking? It's asking about what we're looking for relative to the behavior. And there's no specific behavior here because they're asking about just a general intervention. And that intervention is differential reinforcement of other behaviors, or a DRO. Remember, you need to know DRA, alternative behaviors, DRI, incompatible behaviors, and DRO, other behaviors. So what is that? What is the distinctive idea behind DROs? Well, with DROs, we are looking at behavior in terms of when it's not occurring. Because with the DRO, you're going to reinforce in the absence of a behavior. So if my target behavior is screaming and I'm using a DRO, I'm going to reinforce whenever the client isn't screaming according to the reinforcement schedule. So in that case, what are you primarily going to be looking for when using a DRO relative to the behavior? A, opportunities to reinforce replacement behaviors. One thing about DROs is we don't teach replacement behaviors with differential reinforcement of other behaviors. That's one of the downsides. We're not teaching replacement behaviors. We're just trying to get opportunities to reinforce when the behavior is not occurring. B, opportunities to punish incorrect behaviors. Well, differential reinforcement doesn't utilize punishment. Punishment is not part of differential reinforcement. C, opportunities to reinforce when the target behavior is not occurring. Yes, when you're using a DRO, you're looking for opportunities to reinforce whenever a target behavior is not occurring. So back to our screaming example, you're going to be looking for opportunities that screaming is not occurring to reinforce the behavior. And then the opportunities to shape other behaviors. Again, not teaching replacements when using DRO. DRO, we're simply reinforcing in the absence of the target. So what are we looking for? We're looking for opportunities to reinforce when the target behavior is not occurring. A friend of yours, who is also a behavior technician, tells you they want to use a continuous reinforcement schedule to reinforce their boyfriend's cleaning up the kitchen. When does your friend plan to reinforce their boyfriend? So let's think about this. We're talking about who? We're talking about your friend and their boyfriend, and specifically the friend's plan to reinforce their boyfriend. And what do we know about the reinforcement schedule your friend plans to use? Well, the friend plans to use a continuous reinforcement schedule. And when we use a continuous reinforcement schedule, what does that look like? What type of schedule is that? Well, remember, the only continuous reinforcement schedule we have is an FR1, a fixed ratio 1. And with a fixed ratio 1, when do you reinforce? Well, you reinforce every occurrence of the target behavior. That's what makes it continuous reinforcement. All other reinforcement schedules are intermittent. Continuous reinforcement can only be FR1. So if your friend wants to use a continuous reinforcement schedule, they're going to be using an FR1 to reinforce their boyfriend's cleaning up the kitchen. So when does your friend plan to reinforce their boyfriend? A, anytime the boyfriend cleans up the kitchen. Yes, that would be continuous. Every single time he engages in the response, he gets reinforced, and they would be using an FR1, a continuous schedule. We don't stop at A even though it's correct. We read all of the answer choices and we understand why are the wrong answers wrong. So B, at random times throughout the day when the kitchen is clean. Well, it's not random. With continuous reinforcement, it isn't an average, it isn't random, it's every single time. C, whenever the boyfriend is not cleaning up the kitchen. No, we're not going to reinforce him for not doing the target behavior. And then D, every 3 times the boyfriend cleans up the kitchen. What type of schedule would D be? D would be an FR3. We're using continuous and FR1. So anytime the boyfriend cleans up the kitchen, your friend is going to reinforce their boyfriend. A behavior technician using discrete trial teaching taught her client basic colors. If the behavior technician wanted to work on generalization, what could they do? All right, generalization is more or less our goal. if we're not generalizing, if our clients aren't generalizing, we're not really doing our jobs properly. Okay, generalization is as important as anything. So if we have a behavior technician who's using DTT and she successfully taught her client basic colors, well, rightfully so, she wants to work on generalization. Now, what is DTT good for? DTT is good for new skills. It's good for strengthening skills, making skills stronger. But at some point, we need to start generalizing and maintaining these skills. So if the behavior technician is ready for that, they're at that point, what can they do? A, fade the reinforcement schedule. Sure, part of maintenance and part of generalization is fading the reinforcement schedule, because generalization is getting the behavior to occur in novel, unlearned, untrained environments. A big problem with something like, let's say, teaching colors is when you teach in discrete trial teaching, you might be teaching the same object or card, the color card, over and over again. And then you take that child away from the table and that skill is gone. They're not generalizing. And with DTT, you're typically reinforcing quite a bit. We know in the natural environment, reinforcement doesn't come that often, right? Or as frequently as a DTT procedure provides it. So if we want to work on generalization, we need to start fading out reinforcement schedule, and the client needs to get used to just engaging the behavior without receiving steady reinforcement. B, thicken the reinforcement schedule. We're not going to fade and thicken at the same time. Those are two different things. Thickening would be providing more reinforcement. We're not going to be doing that. We would A, fade the reinforcement schedule. What about C, transition to incidental teaching? Sure. And what is another word for incidental teaching? Well, naturalistic teaching. Incidental and naturalistic teaching, same thing. Naturalistic teaching is great for generalization. DTT and naturalistic teaching have their places. As an RBT, you need to think of discrete trial teaching and incidental teaching as your two guiding teaching strategies. So, if we want to work on generalization, we are going to want to fade the reinforcement schedule and transition to incidental teaching. So ultimately, we're going to be doing both A and C. Gilligan and his crew want to bring their boat to the restaurant on the other side of the bridge that sits on top of the lake. However, Gilligan can't fit his boat under the bridge if the canopy is up because the canopy will hit the bridge and break. While the canopy is up, the bridge functions as what? Okay, this is probably more of a tricky technical question, and so we're just going to work through it, right? Because the way we approach the test is we do all of our work up front, we understand the question, we try to predict answers, and then we get to the answer choices. So the question is asking about the bridge, and what does the bridge function as when the canopy is up? So let's read through this one more time, right? Let's really understand it. Gilligan has his boat, and they want to bring it to the restaurant on the other side of the bridge, but Gilligan can't fit the boat under the bridge if the canopy is up because the canopy will hit the bridge and break. So while the canopy is up, what is that bridge signaling to Gilligan? Well, it's saying if you try to go under me, right, you're going to get punished because your canopy is going to break, and you're no longer going to try to go under me when the canopy is up. It's signaling to Gilligan punishment is available if you try to go under me while the canopy is up. So what do we call a stimulus that signals the consequences available? Well, a discriminative stimulus, right? SDs signal consequences are available. Now, typically RBTs only think about SDs signaling reinforcement, but SDs can signal punishment just the same. So if the canopy is up, the bridge is actually doing what? Well, it's actually signaling that punishment is available. It's actually functioning as an SD for punishment. What about B, SD for reinforcement? Well, if the canopy is down, the story changes, because if Gilligan can now go under the bridge, reinforcement is available. But as long as the canopy's up, he's going to hit the bridge, break his canopy, punishment is available. And then C, S delta for punishment. If you've never heard the term S delta, that's okay. S delta says it's the opposite of the SD. So the SD signals something is available, and S delta says it's not available. However, the bridge is signaling that punishment is available, so it's not going to be an S delta, it's going to be an SD. Now, that's a more difficult question. It requires some higher level thinking, and that's good. You want to expand your thinking. And when you're practicing and doing practice questions, remember, it's not about speed, okay? It's about coming up on questions you struggle with and reviewing them thoroughly, right? So if you don't understand SDs to this extent, that's fine. Use it as a learning opportunity. Stu has his first cup of French roast coffee at 4:30 a.m. Stu usually drinks 3 cups of coffee per day, but he tries the spaced to cups out. Stu doesn't drink his second cup of coffee until 10:30 a.m. Given this information, what would 6 hours represent? Okay, so we know what? We know we're looking at 6 hours. And it's pretty obvious what 6 hours comes between, right? This 4:30 a.m. and this 10:30 a.m. And so Stu is drinking his first cup of coffee at 4:30 a.m. Now, he doesn't drink his second cup until 10:30. So 6 hours pass between his first cup and his second cup. And so 6 hours is the time in between cups of coffee, or the time in between responses. What do we call the measurement of time in between responses? A, rate. Rate is frequency over time. We have a frequency, right? We have per day, so you actually do have a rate. You have 3 cups of coffee per day. The question is not asking about that, though. It's asking about the 6 hours. This is why you have to be very careful and really be diligent up front, okay? You don't want to make the mistake of saying, well, 3 cups of coffee per day, that's rate. It's not asking about the 3 cups. It's asking about the 6 hours. B, latency. Latency would be the time from the SD to the first response. So if we were saying, how long after Stu wakes up does he have his first cup of coffee? That could be latency. But we're not. We're looking at time in between responses. And so 6 hours is going to represent inter-response time. There's 6 hours in between Stu's responses of drinking coffee. And then D, duration. So be careful. Don't confuse inter-response time and duration. Duration measures the length of a single response. So if we measured how long it took Stu to drink a cup of coffee, that would be duration. But we're measuring time in between responses. So we are really looking at C, inter-response time. Aaron took his behavior technician test just the other day and passed with flying colors. His friend asked Aaron if he remembered any questions from the exam and if he could share some of them with him. How should Aaron respond? All right, we have an ethical question, and it's specifically about the behavior technician exam. Aaron took his, passed, and then his friend said, do you remember any questions from the exam? How should Aaron respond? So if you're in Aaron's shoes, you take the exam and you go see your friend, and your friend says, well, do you remember anything from the exam? What is ethical? What are you required to do? A, help out his friend by sharing questions from the exam. Definitely not. You're not allowed to share questions from the exam with other people. It is prohibited by the BCBA. B, refuse to share anything from the exam with his friend. Yes, Aaron can help his friend study. He just can't share anything exactly from the exam with his friend. C, report his friend to the BCBA for asking for this information. Well, no, it's an ethical violation if they share answers, but maybe his friend doesn't know any better, so it's Aaron's job to educate him on this. And then D, report his friend to the company where his friend works. Same idea. Yes, if Aaron shares the exam questions, it's an ethical violation, but maybe his friend doesn't know any better. So it's Aaron's job to tell his friend, hey, I can't do that, right? He's supposed to refuse to share anything from the exam with his friend. When her mom is not in the room, your daughter is smiling and happy around others. Whenever mom enters the room, your daughter begins to cry and reach for mom. Mom has blank over the crying and reaching behavior. So what is occurring here? What is occurring with mom, okay, relative to crying and reaching? Well, we know when mom is not in the room, daughter is smiling and happy. So whatever else is in that room, maybe mom's absence, maybe the other people, has control over the daughter's behavior of smiling and happy. However, when mom enters the room, daughter begins to cry. So whenever the daughter sees mom, she cries and reaches for mom, likely because mom gives it attention, right? And so when behavior changes either in frequency or some sort of magnitude or some sort of measurement in the presence of a stimulus, What do we call that? A, stimulus control. Yes, when we talk about instructional control, this is what we're saying. In the presence of a stimulus, likely a parent or a technician or a teacher, and behavior changes, we're said to have stimulus control over that behavior. That's why some people have very strong instructional control and kids are very well behaved, quote unquote, with them. And then other kids, and then in the presence of other adults, they aren't. There's different stimulus control at play. Mom walking in the room and daughter crying and reaching for mom. Mom has stimulus control. In her presence, the behavior has changed. We don't call it topographical or consequence control, even though it is likely maintained by consequences. We call it stimulus control. So mom has stimulus control over the crying and reaching behavior. If you were asked to recommend a measurement procedure for a client sitting at the table behavior, which of the following procedures would likely produce the least accurate data? This is kind of a general question. We're not asking exactly what we would measure, right, or what we're trying to measure. What it's asking is what's going to produce the least accurate data. And when we think about our measurements, we have continuous, which is rate, duration, latency, frequency, IRT. We have discontinuous, whole interval, partial interval, momentary time sampling. And then we have permanent product. And in virtually every case, discontinuous measurement is going to be less accurate. And why? Well, because you're only getting a sample. If you have a 3-hour session and I use continuous measurement, like rate or duration or latency, I'm recording every instance. If I use a discontinuous measurement over 3 hours, I might only be getting data on 20 minutes. So which of the following procedures would likely produce the least accurate data? Well, it's not going to be rate, duration, or latency because those are continuous. It's going to be something like momentary time sampling, which is discontinuous. Fantastic. Thank you for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.